Hello. We had this journal, SocialEpistemology, which turned out to be a highly interdisciplinary journal to the point where uh, it was less concerned with discipline, from my understanding, and more concerned with any intersection of philosophy, science, sociology, rhetoric, and epistemology. If you just kind of that locus was the journal, and so you really got articles on a whole range of topics. It's really difficult to describe in 5 minutes, so I'm not even going to try. But instead of a kind of progression through the years, we really just identified three kind of quasi-distinct genres that rhetoric of science articles sort of took. And the three we identified were the kind of the more traditional case or textual study, a theoretical development, and a praxis. And they all kind of shared the same element of case and text study. That one genre really is just very specific textual analysis from a rhetorical point of view of a issue or and often a text, a government document or something of this nature. The theoretical development was usually kind of also a text study, but really just trying to explicate some sort of theoretical understanding of what was happening rhetorically instead of like demonstrating. And then the praxis was really actually the most pointed of all the little genres we identified, because those articles concerned themselves with trying to help, let's see, how did I put it here? It's rhetoric of science trying to help science do a better job of, interacting in the public sphere. So that was kind of the most pointed of the three. And like I said, they're not totally distinct. They all share elements of each. So like a good example of a praxis argument that our colleague Lauren Cagle found was Philip Wander and Jaheen Dennis's Prospect for the Rhetoric of Science, where they kind of follow their own personal interactions with strict scientific disciplines and some intergovernmental agencies, and they try to put forth a kind of a definition of rhetoric of science as really specifically helping science negotiate with public argumentation, trying to communicate science to the public and help change minds and do that kind of stuff. And he also makes some suggestions on how to improve that. So that was a definition, like an example of praxis. And another one was John Zimman's Are Scientific Questions Debatable? And in this, Zimman basically, he tries to get across the idea that one of the core jobs of the rhetoric of science is to help sciences because of the immense challenges of communicating interdisciplinary, more like rhetoric of science internal as far as that external, and how rhetoric of science can help different disciplines and different fields of science communicate with each other to get each other's back, as it were. And it kind of describes the essence of scientific rhetoric as organized by written documents for an audience removed both in space and time, shaped by peer review, is personal in practice, and although it has an impersonal style, and is focused on protagonists and not antagonists. So take that with you. All those are her notes, but I think they're pretty good. And he concludes that with kind of, again, this idea of how can you improve scientific rhetoric so that different disciplines communicate better, and give some examples and that kind of thing. One of the good praxis articles I found was Judith Simon's A Socio-Epistemic Framework for Scientific Publishing. And what Simon does is actually pretty crazy. She elaborates this theory, not a theory, but it's an idea of epistemic socialities. We're using Web 2.0 technologies, kind of coming at it from the position of Bruno Latour and Heller Longino, right? And so she's kind of suggesting methods of arriving at objects of episteme socially using these Web 2.0 technology. And she identifies three main kinds of epistemic sociality: integration, aggregation, and selection. Integration is most popularized by Wikipedia, where you have a wide, diverse body of individuals competing and kind of just meshing their ideas together, as it were, kind of an amalgamation of personal epistemes that gather momentum into a more solidified episteme. Aggregation is sort of the same basic, where you have a wide, diversified body of individuals interacting, but at the end result is their episteme. The episteme they create is finalized not through amalgamation, but by a kind of almost a statistical, average, as it were. You kind of, oh well, most people said this, and so it's kind of quasi-selective, but more mathematically based, although not mathematical in practice. I hope it'll make sense if you read it, probably. That's the way it is. And then selection is more just like what we traditionally consider peer review. And so she explicates these three epistemic socialities to try and suggest that the first two that are different and really enabled through digital technologies represent new ways of arriving at scientific knowledge and kind of offer promise for bringing that into the public sphere. Let's see, what else do I have here? Textual analysis. Kegel found this Jap Boss's everyday life objectivity, and it's kind of a straight rhetorical text analysis of Freud's the psychopathology of everyday life, and just uses rhetoric to get at the insights of what it means to go through objectification, I guess it is. The main textual article I found was Robert Danish and Jessica Murdy's Is It Safe to Eat That? And it's an analysis of a risk assessment document about raw oyster consumption in the United States, and from using mainly Burke's concept of metonymy. Yeah, metonymy. I can't talk right. Takes it through how the concepts, the large things like is it safe to eat is kind of reduced to this process of risk mitigation, and it's just turned into a text. And this journey from autonomy of concepts down to epistemes, and she suggests that rhetoric of science, the whole purpose, I guess, is to suggest that rhetoric of science is a way of responding, generating, and managing uncertainty. It's really interesting. She actually suggests that not just the interesting part is not just the managing like we tend to assert it, but it's actually generating uncertainty because of this process from this reduction of concept to empirical fact, when it's not really an empirical fact. It's just kind of a guess. It's just some numbers put together to try and soothe people's souls. And then a good example of theory is Derek Ross's ambiguous weighting and nonsensical sense. Ambiguous weighting and nonsensical sense, where he examines the commonplace concepts of balance and common sense of surveys of people. So it's like he's taking surveys of people's understanding of what the concept of environmentalism means, and he comes across these two commonplace terms of balance and common sense, and he analyzes how they serve to actually compress and restrict people's dialogues and understanding of environment instead of actually helping them heuristically evaluate the situation.
Right. Okay. So to recap, sort of the journal is very interdisciplinary, but it does have sort of an overarching theme of objectivity, which makes sense because it's a social epistemology journal. And so it has this, a lot of the articles, whether they deal specifically with rhetoric of science or not, are very much in the idea of can there be sort of an objective, non-social way of understanding the world around us. So, but there are some really good science-specific rhetoric articles in here. And the three I picked were, I do have a textual analysis of Ludwig Fleck by Eva Heidvorfs, which is specifically sort of arguing that Fleck is a precursor to Kuhn, in that he comes up with a lot of the same sort of relativist ideas about how scientific knowledge is produced, and sort of uses some concepts that predate Kuhn's idea of paradigm. And then the second article is really interesting. I really liked this one. It was Michel Silva's The Aerodynamic of Insects, which actually goes through and argues that complex models of fake moths actually teach the scientists more about how moths have flight and teach us more about our theories of aerodynamics than we do know about birds, which is what most of that modeling is based off of. And it's quite interesting because it then goes on to argue sort of more in a Latourian way that the model in and of itself becomes its own thing that gives us knowledge that we wouldn't get from textual analysis or from, textual analysis. Basically, it's a more sort of complex way of learning scientific information, and so sort of makes the argument that rhetoric of science has to deal more with these sort of pictures, models, things that aren't specifically in language. And then going off of that same sort of argument is Morena Alas, which is negotiating pictures in numbers. And this one is basically more of an institutional look at how scientists negotiate the review process in getting an article published, and how you can have sort of differing interpretations of pictures. So these are particularly fMRI scans of the brain, and it's very much sort of an inter-science negotiation of meaning of these pictures. So mine pretty much went into textual analysis and discussions between scientists and how they create scientific knowledge, and then there are further articles that deal more with how do we get that scientific knowledge disseminated to the public.
And I think just kind of in conclusion, I would, as a group, we would really recommend that maybe another class at another institution would readdress social epistemology, just because there's so much gray area that depending on how fast and loose you want to play rhetoric of science, you're going to find a lot. And it really stems from the fact you have so many of the humanities and social sciences all kind of hub together around science and epistemology, and people get all sorts all over the place with it. So check it out.
Yeah,
it's cool.
All over the place.
They get all sorts of all over the place.
Yeah, that's the best way I could put it.
It's a very good way to put it, trust me.
I love it when you get technical.